All right, Josh, floor is yours.
Yeah, lightning seeds and jollification. In the opening montage, you heard Lucky You, and now you're going to hear Change.
Never gonna be like all those fools. You're going out tonight. There's nothing to lose. You're gonna give it all a try. Don't ever change.
What are stats?
So Jollification by the Lightning Seeds comes in at number 160. I'm sorry, that's from 1994. Number 1,410 in the 1990s. Number 163 in 1994. So this represents actually the first album from 1994 that we're covering on the podcast.
Nice.
And number 8,415 of all time. It is the Lightning Seeds' highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Lightning Seeds is ranked number 2,975 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Okay, this album was released September 5th, 1994, as Matt said. We covered them only once before, the single Pure, back on Season 4, Episode 9. That was in our six-pack of singles. Check that out. The band was formed in Liverpool, England in 1989, and it really is, or at least started out as the creator of one person, Ian Brody, and it was designed as a solo kind of studio effort and not, made to be kind of a band in the traditional sense. It wasn't until this album that he turned it into a touring band and added members to the group. And of course the members back then are different than who they are today. They're still active today. So Ian Brody is the kind of mastermind behind this band on vocals, guitar, and producer. He was a member of a 70s post-punk band that we didn't cover called Big in Japan. And he was also part of new wave bands Original Mirrors and Care before Lightning Seeds started. He also transitioned to a producer in the late 80s and before starting Lightning Seeds, so he actually produced like The Fall and a couple other bands that we've covered their albums as well. They have 7 studio albums, and this is the third. Their latest album came out in 2022 titled See You in the Stars. Genres include alt-rock, Britpop, indie rock. Influences would be Beatles, XTC, The Smiths, The Waterboys, Bee Gees, Aztec Camera. Some similar artists would be The Laws, Edwyn Collins, Blur, Echo and the Bunnymen, Pet Shop Boys, Ocean Blue, The Gorillaz, and Belle and Sebastian. Pure is their highest rated single, reaching 32 on the Billboard Hot 100, and no albums made the Billboard 200. They're really kind of one of those British bands only, especially in kind of the Britpop era. Simon Rogers is the other person on this album particularly that's listed as a producer. Some fun facts about the band. The name derives from a misheard lyric from Prince's 1985 single Raspberry Beret, which Prince sings the line, "Thunder drowns out what the lightning sees." So he took it from that. Lightning Seeds created an England song for the Euro 96 football tournament called Three Lions that went to number 1 on the UK single chart and became an English football chant. And then in 98, it was reworked for the World Cup in France and it became popular again as well.
I read that, Josh, and
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, I want to hear this song. I heard it, and I was very disappointed in the song.
Oh, yeah, I didn't listen to it. I just imagined, the stadium singing it. So they are still touring. In 2023, they played the Glastonbury Festival, and they toured with Madness. All the songs on Jollification were written by Ian Brody, with contributions from Terry Hall of The Specials. Alison Moyet is on here. You'll hear her singing on one song. Ian McNabb and Simon Rogers also contributed to the album. I did see that the single Change reached 13 on the UK chart, so that would have been like one of the highest singles from this album. And the third track, Open Goals, features a single from the Meters' Look a Pie Pie, which we referenced in some other album randomly the other week, so I thought that was interesting that it's coming up again. But yeah, that's the Lightning Seeds. Not much to talk about, but I think there's stuff to talk about with the album itself. So what did you think about Lightning Seeds, John? in
So
Jollification?
yeah, so I picked this one because I like the single that we covered before, and also I remember the song "Changes" from the Clueless soundtrack. It was a
Yes,
song I
that was
really
on there.
liked. That's just jam packed with great songs. That Clueless soundtrack. So I was already predisposed to like them. I wasn't quite sure, is this like a part of the Britpop movement or is it something else? And the answer was it's something else, because
Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned XTC, because that's something that immediately came to mind for me, as did Madness, which you mentioned as well. Terry Hall of the Specials, which it's kind of funny. I had no idea that he wrote Lucky You, which is the song
Right.
was the second favorite song on this album. So I was like, oh, figures, the guy for the Specials wrote, one of the songs I like. But he was in a group called Fun Boy 3 that this sounds a lot like as well. It was an interesting album. It was very eclectic. It's very poppy, I'd say, as much as it is, even though there's guitars in it. It's firmly rooted in pop music, and the lyrics cover interesting topics as well. I don't know if you guys paid attention to the lyrics, but they're pretty literate lyrics that have a little bit of like an Elvis Costello vibe in terms of what they're singing about
I can
at
see
different
that.
times. Yeah, it's but there's also sort of a celebration of youth in this album as well. So like content wise, I thought it was interesting. With that being said, it was kind of in the middle for me a little bit, because I listened to it twice, and with the exception of those two songs that I mentioned, Lucky You and Change, excuse me. There wasn't anything that like demanded me to re-listen, I think, in the way I would like. I kind of got there with Marvelous. Feeling Lazy was another song that had its pleasures. And actually, Feeling Lazy on this album functioned a lot like, Josh, one of the songs on the Velvet Crush album last week.
Yeah.
We did Weird Summer did, and it was
Yeah.
around the same part where it was like a tendency breaker, I think, and it was a little bit eccentric and quirky. And so I was feeling that a little bit, but I kept kind of asking myself, like, why isn't this transcending to another level? And in that, that's where I think it's most similar to me, like something like XTC, where drums and wires are skylarking. I liked stuff on there, and there were a couple tracks like, it wasn't on the two albums we covered, but like XTC did The Mayor of Simpleton, where I'm like, man, that's a really great, catchy song with this bass line. And that's how I felt like about the song Pure on the other album we covered, and Change on this album. But I think I didn't want them to reinvent that sound all the time, but I kind of said, gosh, I wish more songs sounded like those songs did, because they really were earworms for me and caught, and the rest of the album just sort of washed over me a little bit. So I kind of will jump back in. I have some other thoughts. This is also one of the rare albums where I have like no idea what you guys are going to think about this album, which is always kind of an exciting thing for me, because usually I feel like I have a pretty good read, but I'm curious to see. I guess, Matt, what'd you think of this one?
So this is a weird week for me, in which I find
Yeah.
myself like loving an R&B record and feeling very nonplussed about a full-blown pop record with lots
Yeah.
of hooks and catchy elements to it that normally is like catnip for me. But I think I'm kind of with you, John. Like this, it's a very produced record, and there's hooks and catchy elements all over the place, right? But the best way that I can describe it is, it's just, yes, it's enjoyable, it's catchy, it's a good record, it's well done, but it doesn't take it to a level where I'm like, oh man, that was a really great part. Oh man, that was a really great hook or song or whatever. I want to hear that again, or I'm hearing all the layers underneath it and they're all fitting together for me. It was just, I don't know. It was a weird listen, and I did listen to it several times, thinking that I might get it. The more I listened to it, like I picked up on things. And I think to a degree I did. I think I certainly like it more now than when I first heard it. And I think songs that you've kind of pointed out already, John, that like Lucky You and Change are probably the ones that stand out the most.
Yeah.
And like a similar thing with Marvelous, it's like, yeah, it's like I like it, but damn, I don't love it. And I should love this album. This is the sound of an album that I should love and want to like buy and like, you know, on LP and like listen, you know, go see live. But it just, I don't know. It just doesn't go to that next level. I mean, they're certainly drawing on the influences of like, you know, the Beatles and the Beach Boys. There's like early '60s, like the Zombies, you know, like that
Kinks,
kind of.
I think too.
The Kinks too. There's also ELO, like that production, that ELO type production.
Yeah.
And then
with the synths, in particular.
Yeah, especially Punch and Judy is where that really stood out. I'm like, that's an ELO song, that Punch and Judy song. But also, I'm like hearing elements of more modern music, like Cut Copy. There's a song on here that sounds like a Cut Copy song. Or Group Love was another, you know, act that's now, they're not, I wouldn't say that they are new acts, but they are newer in the context of those other artists that I just mentioned before. And in some ways, this sound is very similar kind of to more of a modern alt rock kind of some stuff you're going to find more in alt rock radio these days, even though there's not really any edge to it. But there's something about this type of pop, more synth layered than guitar driven, right? In a lot of places.
Well, the synths sort of drown the guitars in this album, is how I wrote it down. Yeah,
it's certainly a synth heavy record, and I think a lot of more quote unquote rock and, you know, alt rock music has kind of gone in that direction in recent years. So it's kind of an interesting thing in that regard, because it's definitely, you know, it's got a foot in the past and a foot in the future, because this is only 94, and, you know, this I wouldn't be surprised hearing this if it came out today, the way that this is produced. It doesn't, in that way, it's I wouldn't say that it's a dated record. But yeah, man, there's just, it's like he's getting up the mountain, he's climbing, he's building, and it just never gets over, right? It just never, gets to that point where I'm like, oh, I love this, you know? So yeah, disappointed, kind of mad at myself. I'm like, damn it, I want to love this. And it's interesting that you guys said XTC, because that's not, that didn't come up in my Rolodex of bands. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that's another example of a band that like is something that there's a lot of elements about that band that I should love, and I just accept very similar reaction. I'd probably say I like this better. I think that this had more. I don't know, maybe XTC was a little bit more quirky and harder to grasp onto. But I don't know, maybe it is a very British sounding record. That's the other thing too. It's a lot of times with British singers, you can't really pick out the accent, and you can pick out this guy's accent, Ian Brody's accent, very easily. Like he's kind of, and I don't know how British singers do that, if it's like an intentional thing, if it just happens naturally or whatever, but it is a very British sounding record because of his vocals. And I don't think that in and of itself was the reason why I didn't like it. It's more about the music. I'm fine with the vocals. I think he's a good singer, but it's just interesting that's XTC's got a similar vibe going on. And there's just, I don't know. It's hard to, it's just an X factor. It's just a feeling, gut reaction. It's just like not quite there for me. So this is kind of like, it's kind of a mid record to me, to be honest. I don't think I'd say it's kind of average to be, which is really disappointing, because I love this kind of stuff, and generally speaking. So a little disappointed.
Yeah, I think I'm a little higher on it than you guys are, but I am in the same kind of space with my thoughts on it. It was, I think, something about it. I think the production is something that kind of held me back from it being elevated. It seems like very busy in a way, kind of in a compressed way. Like you can't pick out what's going on. There's a bit of a freneticism to it that throws me off, and I think the songs kind of all run together in my head by the time I get through the album. I do really like the songs. Like I feel like it starts off really strong with kind of the opening 4, and then I'm riding that crest, and then by the end I just kind of get like worn out. And there's something about, and I like you guys, I'm struggling to figure out why that is, because there are, like Matt said, there are hooks on here, and there are like interesting beats, and I think it's just something with like the continuing structure of the songs, or not the continuing structure, the continuing similarities between the songs that make them run together in my head and hard to pick out. They're all kind of formatted in a way that, I don't know, there's a lot of like dance vibes to this. Like you could play it in a club. I think maybe I don't know if like the Manchester kind of baggy culture that we've talked about too with the Stone Roses, or like the rave culture, if that's like playing into it, but I can totally see this album just being like on at a rave and people like dancing to it and stuff. I like that it's a very kind of happy and peppy record and upbeat, but I think there is no like slowdown, and I think maybe that's what's holding me back too. It's I like some of the different choices that are made on it. Like in Open Goals has a Hammond organ that's pretty interesting. There's I agree, I like the Punch and Judy song. There is stuff here to like, but there is something holding me back from elevating it more, and I don't know what that is. So, but there are definitely tracks that are standout, like you guys said. Perfect and Change, the ones I picked, were great. I think there is stuff here for people. Maybe just not all at once. Maybe it's just more digestible tidbits or something.
Do you think it's a Britishness to it, or is it something different?
No, because I love the Kinks. I've loved some of the other bands that are purely British, but I really think it's something about the production, or maybe just this era of British music that's throwing me off.
Yeah, it's either the production or it's the quality of the song. Like I can't figure out which one is or it's a combination of both, perhaps, put together. So I don't know. That's why it's frustrating, because I'm just like, what is it? I don't know. It's just
maybe it just doesn't have that certain thing
I don't get the feels the way that I would like to. So.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I couldn't quite place it, because it was missing something for me. But I'm like, maybe Matt and Josh found it, but it sounds like you guys had the same thing. You were searching and not turned off, but also just, it's like it was like, I described this as like you went on a date with this album, and it was not a bad date, not a disaster at all, but you wouldn't go on date 2, right? You know what I mean? But yeah. But you wouldn't ghost the album either. Not that I would at it, but I said you'd make sure that you said I enjoyed myself. But we're just not meant for
and
each
not
other.
to
That's how I feel about this album.
To have a transition, maybe to our next segment. The next album is kind of interesting counter to that, in that I feel like that album does have it. So